You are standing on the edge of a bog in County Mayo. The year is 1847, the worst year of the Great Hunger. Around you, the wind carries the smell of rot, not from corpses, but from the fields. The potato plants, blackened and collapsing, exhale the sweet, sickly odor of death. The air hums with flies. You hear a mother's wail, faint but piercing, as she rocks the body of her child, the boy's face sunken, lips cracked, eyes half open as if still pleading for bread that never came. The British grain ships groan in the nearby harbor, sails full, bound for England. No one stops them. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness. If you can still breathe through the stench of hunger, stay a little longer. What you will hear tonight is not myth, it is recorded in parish books, in letters that crossed the Irish Sea, and in bones unearthed from shallow graves. Subscribe if you wish to walk deeper into this silence, like so many who once did. And before we begin, tell us in the comments where you are listening from, and what hour of the night keeps you awake. You are in Ireland in the mid-19th century, a land of emerald fields and grey skies. Bound under the rule of the British Crown, to the east lies London, the heart of empire, beating with wealth, industry, and pride. To the west, across the Irish Sea, lie the colonies of the forgotten, 8 million Irish souls, most of them poor tenants living off a single crop, the potato. By 1845, it was already a fragile existence. The land, though fertile, was not theirs. Nearly all of it was owned by absentee landlords, Anglo-Irish gentry who collected rent but rarely set foot on the soil. The Irish peasantry worked these fields from dawn until exhaustion, feeding England's markets with beef, butter, and grain, while their own survival depended on the humble potato. It was cheap, dense in nutrition, and could grow even in poor soil. 1 acre could feed a family for a year. Then, one morning, the leaves began to curl. A strange black fungus, Phytophthora infestans, drifted from ships arriving from North America. Within weeks, it spread through the Irish countryside like a curse. Potatoes, once plump and solid, turned to gray slime beneath the skin. When sliced open, they exuded a stench so foul that even pigs refused to eat them. In Dublin markets, buyers recoiled. By October 1845, nearly half the crop was gone. At first, the British government dismissed it as an agricultural setback. Sir Robert Peel, then Prime Minister, imported Indian corn from America, but the shipments arrived too late and too little. Meanwhile, the export of Irish food continued under military guard. Ships loaded with wheat and oats left Cork and Limerick daily, their holds full, passing starving men who watched in silence from the quays. By 1846, famine had become the island's shadow. People ate grass, nettles, even seaweed. There are records, documented by British officers themselves, of families boiling the skin of dead animals, of children dying with green foam around their lips. Typhus and dysentery spread rapidly through the weakened population. Fever hospitals overflowed. In Skibbereen, an English journalist wrote of entering a hut and finding 6 corpses, half naked, black with dirt and filth, the living lying beside the dead. And yet, official policy remained rigid. The royal treasury, wary of dependency, closed the soup kitchens and insisted on market discipline. To receive meager aid, the starving were required to labor in public works, breaking stones, building useless roads to nowhere, for pennies. Many collapsed where they stood. The British Assistant Secretary, Charles Trevelyan, called the famine a mechanism for divine correction, a judgment upon the Irish for their moral failings. You, standing amid the mud and cold, can hear that correction everywhere, in the clatter of the workhouse gate, the dull thud of a shovel against frozen ground, the quiet of a mother who no longer cries because there are no tears left. The year 1847 would later be called Black 47, the year when hunger became history's wound, and Britain's indifference became its stain. You wake before dawn in the village of Kilrush, County Clare, the mist is thick enough to taste. The air carries that same sickening sweetness, the scent of decay that never seems to leave. You step out onto the dirt road and the horizon looks bruised. In the half-light, the fields glisten as though wet with dew. But when your boots reach the ridge, you realize the moisture is something else entirely. The potato plants, once proud, green, and alive, are blackened, collapsed, slick with the oily sheen of death. You kneel, dig your hand into the soil, and lift one. It disintegrates in your fingers. Inside is a pulpy gray rot, alive with the smell of mildew and something worse, something human. You gag, wipe your hand against your coat, and look up. Across the field, others are doing the same. You can hear their voices, sharp with disbelief. One man drops to his knees, clutching the soil like a body. Another, an old woman, begins to pray, her voice thin, like the wind itself. The year is 1846. The blight has returned, fiercer than before. Last year, there was still hope. Some families had managed to store enough seed potatoes. Some held on to faith that the fungus had been a passing misfortune. But now the disease moves faster, darker. From Cork to Donegal, the same scene repeats, leaves curling, stalks blackening overnight, tubers turning to gray slime. The sound of digging fills the countryside. The rhythm of desperation. You see men on their knees in the fields long after sunset, lighting torches to inspect each root. Every thrust of the spade feels like a prayer. Every failure, a funeral. In Dublin, the newspapers carry reports of ruin. In London, officials debate moral hazard. In the cottages of Ireland, hunger begins to speak in new languages, coughs, fevers, silences. The workhouses, once built for paupers, now drown in the living. By September, entire families have walked miles through rain and mud just to reach the gates. They arrive barefoot, their feet swollen and bleeding, their faces yellowed, hollowed, or unrecognizable. The stench inside is overwhelming, a mixture of sweat, sickness, and death. Children lie on straw floors, their bellies swollen from starvation, their eyes too large for their faces. A priest, Father Matthew, writes in his journal, "The odor of the living is the same as the odor of the dead." And outside, the fields continue to rot. You hear it said that grain ships still leave the ports. You watch from a cliff above Galway Bay as British vessels load sacks of wheat, barley, and oats. The cargo holds are sealed with wax. The sails unfurl, and the wind carries them east, toward England. A local man mutters, "They take the bread from our mouths." But no one shouts. There are soldiers on the dock, rifles gleaming in the gray drizzle. One child, barefoot and ragged, chases the ship until it vanishes into fog. In London, Charles Trevelyan signs his name on a memo declaring that the cure will not be permanent if the people depend on charity. He calls the famine an effective agent for reducing surplus population. In Westminster, the words are coldly logical. In Ireland, they are a death sentence. By winter, the countryside becomes a graveyard. The first to die are the very young and the very old. Villages grow quiet. Doors hang open to cottages where no smoke rises. A government inspector in Skibbereen reports, "I saw the naked bodies of 2 children lying by the roadside, their mother dead inside the hut. The father gone to seek food." The inspector's horse refused to approach the house. The smell of decomposition was too strong. You are sent to collect statistics. At least that is what the British records will later call your duty. But what you count are not numbers. You count ribs. You count graves. You count how many still have breath left in the morning. In some parishes, the dead outnumber the living. The burial pits fill faster than they can be dug. The earth, softened by rain, exhales the smell of decay that never fades. And yet, amid the horror, there are moments of silence that feel worse than screams. In County Kerry, a priest offers last rites to a family of 6. None of them move. They are beyond pain. In Connemara, a mother is found clutching the body of her child so tightly that villagers must pry her fingers open to separate them. In the parish of Kilmore, a doctor notes that the corpses are too emaciated to rot properly. Their skin shrinks, their bones visible through parchment flesh. Death, even here, seems reluctant to finish its work. The British government responds with bureaucracy. Committees are formed, reports are filed, funds are delayed, soup kitchens, opened briefly under the Quakers' relief efforts, feed thousands, but they are temporary, closed by decree to prevent dependence. The Treasury insists that famine relief must not distort the free market. The logic is as sterile as it is cruel. In Dublin Castle, officials speak of progress. Outside its walls, carts carry corpses through the streets. The dead are stacked in churchyards like firewood. An English traveler writes that dogs grow fat in famine. And still, the exports continue. Ships full of grain and livestock leave Ireland's ports under armed protection. In the harbors, emaciated men watch in silence as their cattle are driven aboard. Their eyes are too empty to hate. They know already that the empire's hunger outweighs their own. By February 1847, the death toll climbs into the hundreds of thousands. Whole districts are depopulated. Those who can walk begin to flee. The roads fill with lines of migrants, thin, silent, carrying everything they own on their backs. They head toward the ports, chasing rumors of ships bound for America. Many will die before reaching them. Others will die at sea, their bodies buried in the Atlantic, nameless beneath the waves. You pass one such group on the road. A man drags a wooden cart. Inside are his wife and 2 children, both motionless. He moves 1 foot at a time, eyes vacant. When you ask where he is going, he answers, away. That single word echoes longer than a sermon. In the parishes of Clare and Galway, fever spreads faster than hunger. The lice carry typhus. The water carries cholera. People too weak to move lie side by side in ditches, their breath forming mist in the cold dawn until it stops. Doctors die first, then priests. Coffins run out. Bodies are wrapped in blankets, buried shallow, sometimes only covered in sod. In some places, wolves return to the hills, drawn by the scent. London newspapers call it distress. The Irish call it in Gortamore, the Great Hunger. You try to write what you see, but words collapse beneath the weight of it. The pages of your notebook curl from dampness. The ink bleeds. The cries of the living and the silence of the dead merge into one sound, something hollow, endless, and almost holy. When spring finally comes, the ground thaws, revealing bones in the furrows. Fields that once promised life now hold the remains of those who tilled them. And still, there is no reckoning. Britain's royal court holds a ball that April. The chandeliers blaze. The orchestra plays. Across the sea, the Irish countryside glows with the same light candle flames set before small wooden crosses. The empire continues its feast. Ireland, its famine. You stand on the edge of that divide, one that history still refuses to close. You wake to the sound of coughing. Not one voice, but hundreds, rising and falling like waves in a harbor. The year is 1847, and Ireland has become a country of echoes. The famine is no longer about hunger alone. It has turned into something more, an anatomy of disease. In the village of Skibbereen, the streets are silent, but the workhouse hums with fever. You enter through the gates, the hinges stiff with rust. Inside, the smell strikes first. It is a mix of vomit, rot, and something sour that burns your throat. Rows of cots stretch before you, filled with figures that no longer look human. The air is heavy with the sound of wheezing, the low moan of those who no longer have the strength to die quietly. A doctor wipes his brow with a blood-stained rag and mutters, "It's not the hunger that kills them now, it's the fever." Typhus, relapsing fever, dysentery, they spread faster than mercy. The lice move from one dying body to the next. There are no walls thick enough to stop them. The British relief officers write of filth diseases, as though filth were a moral choice. They send disinfectant instead of food. They call it progress. You pass a girl whose skin glistens with sweat. Her eyes roll back, her mouth open, teeth clenched on nothing. The nurse beside her whispers. She had nothing but nettle soup for 3 weeks. In the next cot, an old man mumbles scripture. You lean close and realize he is counting his family, one name after another, until the list stops halfway. Unfinished. Outside, in the lanes, the world is decomposing. Carts filled with corpses rattle toward the burial pits. The dead are stacked like firewood, limbs intertwined, faces blurred by decay. The gravediggers, half-starved themselves, work with cloth tied over their mouths. In the rain, the lime they throw on the bodies forms white smoke that drifts over the hills. You walk past a cottage that once housed 7. Only one remains. A woman sits in the doorway, rocking something wrapped in a shawl. You cannot tell if it is a child or a bundle of clothes. When you speak, she looks through you as if her eyes are glass. She murmurs, "The blight took the crop. God took the rest." In London, politicians debate whether more aid will weaken moral character. Charles Trevelyan writes again, "The calamity must not be too much mitigated." The logic of empire demands discipline, even in death. In the royal papers, Queen Victoria donates £2, less than what her stable spends in a year. Newspapers call her gesture compassionate. The Irish call it a mockery. By mid-year, the death toll has passed 1 million. Parish priests stop recording names. There are too many to write. In some areas, whole families die without burial. The British Relief Commission orders more soup kitchens. But the rations are thin. The queues endless. People wait for hours in the rain, shivering, silent. When the pot runs dry, they still wait, not because they expect more, but because they cannot move anymore. You follow a relief officer into the countryside. The mud reaches your ankles. The hedgerows are stripped bare, no berries, no bark, nothing left to chew. In a ditch, you find a group of men huddled together, their faces swollen, lips green. One of them holds a rosary made of bones. When you ask where they are from, another whispers, "From nowhere now." The fever spares no one. Priests die giving last rites. Doctors collapse beside their patients. Even the English soldiers stationed to maintain order fall ill. Yet the grain ships still depart. By year's end, Ireland exports enough food to feed its population twice over. It is all meticulously recorded in ledgers stamped with the royal seal. The numbers are precise. The graves are not. In the western counties, the famine begins to erase entire landscapes. Roofs collapse under the weight of neglect. Fields once green now grow nothing but thistles. The skeletal remains of cattle bleach in the sun. You see them from the road, skulls staring upward, as if asking the same question every Irish mother does. Why? And still, the emigrant ships begin to fill. They are called coffin ships now, hulks of wood carrying the desperate across the Atlantic. You watch one being loaded in Cork. Whole families climb aboard, clutching what little they own. The hold smells of salt and sickness. A priest blesses the deck, his voice trembling. Within weeks, 1 in 5 aboard will die of fever before reaching America. Some will be thrown overboard, their bodies swallowed by gray waves that seem gentler than the land they left behind. The letters that return from survivors are sparse, their handwriting shaky. "We have bread here," one man writes from Boston, "but no Ireland." In the parish of Ballina, a British officer notes that people now resemble ghosts. His report is filed, approved, forgotten. In another report, the physician Daniel Donovan writes of a cabin where he found 5 bodies lying on straw, covered with rags, one still warm. His pen scratches the page, his words distant, clinical, but you can almost hear his hands tremble. Black 47 becomes a year without sound. The church bells stop ringing. The markets close. Even the dogs grow silent. Only the wind moves, carrying the faint smell of decay that clings to everything, to wood, to clothing, to breath itself. You reach the cliffs at Maher one evening, looking down at the sea. The sunset stains the water the color of rust. You can hear the faint echo of hymns carried from a nearby churchyard. the same few verses sung again and again because no one remembers the rest. A woman kneels beside a mound of earth, pressing her lips to a wooden cross with no name. She whispers something you cannot hear. Perhaps it is forgiveness. Perhaps it is only exhaustion. When you turn back toward the village, you see something moving in the distance, a line of people walking. Small and slow, along the road, they are leaving, carrying nothing but memory. The famine has broken their bodies, but not their will to move. You realize that Ireland itself is in motion now, a migration of bones, prayers, and silence. In the centuries to come, historians will call this a tragedy. But standing here, amid the wind and the graves, you understand that tragedy is too small a word. What happened in 1847 was not an accident of nature. It was a design of empire, a famine enforced by policy, written in ledgers and sealed with royal indifference. The British Parliament will later congratulate itself on its restraint. The newspapers will speak of improvement, of moral discipline restored. But for those who lay in the ditches of Clare and Kerry, there was no discipline, no improvement, only the long quiet of hunger finally ended. You kneel by one of those graves, brush away the moss, and read a carving so faint it's almost gone. Lord, have mercy on us. The words are not prayer now, they are evidence. The wind rises again, carrying that old smell, smoke, lime, salt, and rot. You breathe it in because there is nothing else left to breathe. You stand on the docks of Cork in the spring of 1848. The air is thick with fog and the smell of brine, tar, and human fear. The famine has emptied the countryside. Now, the survivors gather here, at the edge of the sea, thousands of them, pressed shoulder to shoulder, clutching bundles of rags and tin pots, waiting for ships that promise salvation but often deliver only another form of death. The emigration offices call it assisted passage. The people call it escape. The British call it policy. But what stands before you are not emigrants. They are the last remnants of a nation unmade by hunger. The ships are old cargo vessels, refitted in haste to carry human freight. Their hulls still smell of cattle and salt. Each one is supposed to carry a few hundred passengers. Many load twice that. The ticket price, a few pounds, is paid through the sale of land, livestock, or whatever can be pawned. Some landlords even pay the fare themselves, eager to clear their estates of pauper tenants. They call it charity. It is expulsion by another name. You walk the line that snakes toward the gangplank. You see faces you will not forget. A woman with a rosary wound tied around her hand. A boy whose eyes are already far away. An old man muttering a prayer in Gaelic. Words so old they sound like wind over stones. Families hold each other close, afraid that the crowd will break them apart before the voyage even begins. The ship creaks, impatient, its ropes groaning like a living thing. When the first bell sounds, the crowd moves as one. You are carried forward by their motion, up the narrow gangway and into the dimness below deck. The smell hits you instantly. Stale air, damp wood, and the human press of unwashed bodies. There is barely enough light to see. Rows of wooden bunks line the walls, 3 tiers high, each space no wider than a coffin. The passengers call them that. Coffins waiting for the sea to finish the job the land began. When the ship finally pulls away, the sound of weeping rises from every level. The harbor fades into fog. Ireland disappears behind you, green turning to gray, and then to nothing. The voyage lasts 6 weeks if the weather holds. Longer if it doesn't. Water rations are scarce. Food is worse. Salted meat, hard bread, weevils crawling in the flour. Within days, the first fevers break out. Typhus spreads through the decks like fire. One cough, one touch, one shared blanket, and the disease moves on. The ship's surgeon, if there is one, can do little more than bleed or quarantine the sick. The sick are locked below. The air foul, the heat suffocating. The sound that reaches you at night is not of waves but of breathing, labored, uneven, ending without warning. By the 3rd week, the deaths begin to mount. The sailors grow accustomed to it. Each morning, they drag the bodies up, one by one, and lay them on the open deck. You see them lined up in silence, children, mothers, men whose faces have already been erased by fever. There is no time for prayer. The captain gives the order, and the bodies are slid into the sea. The splash is small, the sound disappears into the waves. Sometimes, when the wind is still, you can hear the wailing of those who remain, the wives, the fathers, the ones who cannot look away. One woman, clutching a bundle of cloth, refuses to let go. When the sailors try to take it from her, she screams until her voice breaks. Inside the bundle is her child, dead for 3 days. She has kept him hidden, unwilling to surrender him to the water. The ship's log records it as insubordination. The North Atlantic in April is merciless. The cold cuts through the wood, through skin, through prayer. The storms come without warning. Waves crash over the deck, washing away barrels and belongings. The passengers below scream as water floods through the seams. You feel the ship shudder, as if begging for release. For a moment, you think it might never right itself. In one storm, a mast snaps. The deckhand beside you is thrown overboard, gone before anyone can shout his name. The captain orders calm, but even his voice trembles. You cling to the rail, drenched, shaking. Around you, the sea is black, endless, full of the dead. By the 5th week, the ship reeks of sickness. The doctor stops recording the dead. There are too many. Those who survive are gaunt, eyes glazed, hair crawling with lice. The priest on board gives confession until he collapses. The crew begins to burn vinegar-soaked rags to mask the smell. It does nothing. In one corner, a child sings. The melody is faint, broken. His mother has died beside him. He sings to keep her warm. When land finally appears, a faint line on the horizon, no one cheers. The survivors are too weak to stand. The ship glides into the harbor of Quebec, where quarantine ships wait like vultures. Inspectors board with masks and clipboards, counting what remains of the living. They burn the clothes of the dead. They call the survivors famine immigrants. You know better. They are exiles, ghosts in flesh. Of the hundreds who boarded with you, nearly half are gone. Their names never entered any record. Their bodies rest in the Atlantic, unmarked, unmourned, swallowed by the same water that carried them from home. As you step onto the foreign shore, the ground feels strange, solid but indifferent. The air smells of pine instead of peat. The survivors kneel, some kissing the earth, others weeping in silence. Behind them, the coffin ship creaks as if sighing, one voyage done, countless more to come. In the years that follow, more than 1 million will cross the ocean like this. Canada, America, Australia, new worlds built upon the bones of the old. The Irish diaspora will grow, spreading across continents. But the memory of those ships, the smell, the cries, the splash, will follow them forever. In Boston, a newspaper describes the arrivals, pale, hollow-eyed, reeking of disease, speaking a language not our own. They call them a burden. They do not see what they carry, the memory of an island drowned in hunger. You walk among them now, these newly arrived. You hear them whisper prayers in Gaelic under their breath. You see them build churches, dig canals, light candles for the dead left behind. Every flicker of flame is an act of rebellion, a refusal to let memory drown. Years later, sailors will say that on quiet nights, the Atlantic still whispers. They will swear that if you listen closely, you can hear the faint sound of hymns rising from beneath the waves, not of the drowned crying, but of the dead remembering. You listen now, standing at the shore. The wind moves over the water, and for a moment you think you hear it too, a single voice, soft and endless, singing for home. You are in London now. The year is 1848. Rain falls softly against the windows of Westminster, muffling the sound of carriages on wet stone. Inside, beneath the high arches and chandeliers, the air smells faintly of cigars and polished oak, the scent of wealth, of power, of indifference. Across the Irish Sea, millions starve. But here, the empire debates policy. You sit in the visitors' gallery as men in tailored coats rise to speak. They talk of markets, of discipline, of moral fortitude. Their voices echo across the hall like sermons, each word polished, precise, untouched by dirt or hunger. On the table below lies a stack of reports, famine statistics, mortality rates, export numbers. None of them mention the word death. They prefer loss of population. One member of parliament insists that God's hand is at work in Ireland. Another claims that too much aid would breed idleness. The clerk records every sentence faithfully. No one mentions the smell of decay rising from the fields, or the children buried without names. The famine, in this room, is theory. You glance down at the faces of those who decide life and death from a distance. Lord John Russell, the Prime Minister, listens without expression. Sir Charles Trevelyan, architect of relief policy, scribbles notes. He will later publish a book calling The Famine, a visitation of divine providence. His words will be praised for their moral clarity. Outside the chamber, London thrives. The docks bustle with ships from the Indies, their holds full of tea, sugar, and silk. The royal gardens bloom, fountains spill into marble basins. A nation drunk on progress, railways, factories, imperial pride. Yet the same empire that can build steam engines and telegraphs cannot bring bread to the dying across the sea. You walk past the newspapers displayed on Fleet Street. Their headlines speak of Irish indolence, of native weakness. Political cartoons show beggars in rags, mouths open, hands outstretched. The subtext is clear. They deserve their suffering. The famine becomes not a disaster, but a lesson. A warning to the poor of England not to expect compassion. The machinery of empire hums quietly beneath the surface. Relief funds are cut, workhouses close, corn laws shift to favor landlords and merchants. Even the soup kitchens established by the Quakers, the few that saved hundreds of thousands, are ordered to shut down by the Treasury. The official reasoning: to encourage self-reliance. You travel north to Liverpool, where the Irish arrive daily by the thousands. The port reeks of sweat, sewage, and salt. You see them huddled in alleys, barefoot, hollow-eyed, their accents strange to English ears. Shopkeepers bar their doors. Notices appear on windows. No Irish need apply. The city fears disease, blames the dying for their infection. Yet amid the cruelty, there are moments of quiet resistance. In a small church near Toxteth, a Protestant minister preaches to an Irish crowd, offering bread and water without question. In a London warehouse, women sew blankets for families they will never meet. A few voices cry out against the government's neglect. John Mitchell, the Irish nationalist journalist, writes that the Almighty indeed sent the potato blight, but the English created the famine. For that sentence, he is arrested and exiled. The empire has no patience for witnesses. You read the government correspondence, letters sealed with wax, stamped with the royal crest. They speak of logistics, budgets, the need to maintain the dignity of governance. Nowhere do they mention hunger as a human face. Ireland, in their language, is not a land of people but of figures on paper, a ledger to be balanced. When Queen Victoria visits Ireland in 1849, the press calls it the famine tour. Streets are scrubbed clean, flowers laid along her path. The starving are hidden from view. At Dublin Castle, the banquet table gleams with silverware and roast meats. Outside the gates, barefoot children watch the royal carriages roll by, their reflections trembling in puddles. The Queen smiles, waves, and leaves. You are standing at the port of Kingstown when her ship departs. The cannon fire salutes. The cheers fade. Behind you, the workhouses still overflow. The dead carts still roll. In Skibbereen, a parish priest writes, "Our government sleeps while its subjects die." His letter never reaches London. In the years to come, the same officials who cut rations will be knighted for their efficient administration. Trevelyan himself will receive the Order of the Bath for his service to the crown. The empire rewards obedience, not compassion. The famine becomes a political ghost. In Britain, people move on. The newspapers stop reporting. The official inquiry concludes that natural causes were primarily responsible. Statues are built, not of the dead, but of the men who managed them. The silence grows so complete that even conscience learns to whisper. And yet, in Ireland, the silence festers. The survivors remember, in song, in prayer, in the stories told beside dying fires. They remember the ships that left, the neighbors who vanished, the landlords who cleared them from the land. The blight may have begun in the soil, but what destroyed Ireland was policy, deliberate, calculated neglect cloaked in the language of governance. You walk once more along the River Thames at dusk. The lamps flicker in the mist, reflected in black water. Somewhere upriver, a dinner party is beginning. The clink of glass, the murmur of laughter, it all sounds like another world. But beneath it runs the same river that carried food away from starving mouths. The same current that washed Irish grain toward English markets while children died in their mother's arms. History will record it neatly. The Great Famine, 1845 to 1852. But standing here, you understand that famine is not measured in years. It lingers, in the bones of the land, in the bitterness of generations, in the ghost of every empty plate. You look back toward the west. Across the sea you cannot see. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the wind moves through fields that still will not forget. The empire has its monuments. Ireland has its silence. And you are still here, listening. You stand in the ruins of a cottage in County Galway. The roof is gone. The walls lean inward, blackened by time and rain. Moss grows where children once slept. The hearth, cold for years, still bears the faint outline of soot, the last smoke that ever rose from this home. The famine has ended, they say, but the word ended feels wrong. It suggests closure, and there is none here, only silence, and ghosts. It is 1852. The blight has passed, but the hunger has not. Fields are green again, yet the villages remain empty. Over 1 million have died, and more than 2 million have fled. The land looks healed, but it is hollow. You walk through mile after mile of deserted countryside, cottages roofless, doors hanging open, graves marked only by stones. The birds sing again, but their song echoes over emptiness. Those who survived live with the memory like a second skin. They speak of the time of the hunger in lowered voices, as though the very sound of it might bring the blight back. Some refuse to plant potatoes ever again. Others bury small scraps of food under their floorboards, an instinct born from fear that never leaves. In towns, faces have changed. The old Gaelic songs fade. The language itself begins to vanish. Hunger has not just killed bodies. It has devoured memory. You walk toward the sea and find a pier known as An Sé Ad Chonid, the Pier of Tears. Here, ships once carried away the starving. And here, those left behind waved until their arms grew tired. Some still come to this place, lighting candles for brothers or daughters who never returned. The wind moves across the water like a voice, whispering the names no one else remembers. Across the Atlantic, the Irish live again, or try to. In Boston, New York, Quebec, Toronto, they dig canals, build railways, clean the houses of the rich. Their hands, once calloused from tilling wet Irish soil, now turn iron and brick. They gather in small, tight communities, clinging to faith and accent like life rafts. The world calls them immigrants. They call themselves survivors. Yet survival comes with its own hunger, a hunger to belong, to be seen, to be forgiven for living when others did not. The Irish who made it to America are met with suspicion. Newspapers call them diseased, lazy, papist swarms. Landlords refuse to rent to them. Factories turn them away. In the cities, Irish women scrub floors for pennies, while men dig trenches so deep they forget what sunlight feels like. But still, they send letters home, words full of hope they no longer feel. We are well, there is bread here, someday, we will send for you. You see them gather in small churches, lighting candles for the dead of Ireland. They teach their children to pray for those still buried in unmarked graves. Even across oceans, the famine clings to them. When they cough, they taste the same salt air they left behind. When they sleep, they dream of green fields that are no longer theirs. Back in Ireland, the population continues to fall. The census of 1851 reveals a loss so vast it seems impossible, more than a quarter of the nation gone. The workhouses, once full, are now empty shells. The British administrators call it progress. Landlords consolidate estates, turning farms into vast grazing fields. The empire praises its efficiency. But among the Irish, there is a new word whispered, Andrashail, the bad life. It means more than famine. It means humiliation, grief, endurance. It means carrying the weight of something too heavy to name. In Dublin, memorial processions begin quietly. Black banners, thin as shadows, carried through streets lined with silence. Priests speak of faith. Widows carry photographs of sons lost to the sea. The empire does not attend. The famine is now history, tidy, concluded, archived, but in the small corners of Ireland, memory breathes. You travel north to Donegal, where an old man tends a field alone. His hands are brown and scarred, his eyes pale as sea glass. He tells you that when the hunger came, his family burned their furniture to cook nettles. We thought it would end, he says, but it never did, not here. He gestures toward the hills, where the ruins of a dozen homes stand like broken teeth. He does not weep. He only looks at the sky and adds, "It took God longer to forget than it took England." In the decades that follow, the survivors' children will build new lives. They will fill ships again, not as refugees this time, but as workers, soldiers, and dreamers. Irish hands will raise the bridges of New York, dig the tunnels of London, and fight in wars for nations that once ignored their cries. They will carry the famine within them, an inheritance of endurance. And in 1901, when Queen Victoria dies, her obituary will not mention Ireland. Her reign will be remembered for empire, for progress, for glory, but on the western coast, in towns like Skibbereen and Ballina, her name will still taste bitter on the tongue. You walk through one of those towns now. A century has passed, yet the famine lingers. Tourists visit memorials, leave coins, take photographs, but the ground beneath their feet is layered with the bones of those who once starved here. You imagine them still, their eyes, their silence, their slow disappearance into the earth. The British records will never say their names. History will call them losses. You sit beside one of the famine graves. The grass is tall, hiding the stones. The inscription on one reads simply, "Here lie many." The simplicity feels cruel. You run your hand across the lichen-covered letters and feel something pulse beneath, not anger, not pity, but a quiet knowing. The famine was not only about death, it was about the world's capacity to look away. And that silence, that refusal to see, is its most enduring wound. You rise and look toward the sea. The wind is cold, the horizon pale and infinite. Somewhere beyond it lies the world the survivors built, the descendants who still carry Ireland in their blood, in their music, in the faint sorrow that never leaves their songs. The empire that starved them is gone, its flags folded, its monuments fading into soot. But hunger, once born, finds new shapes, in greed, in neglect, in history's comfortable forgetting. As the sun dips low, the light catches the stone walls of the ruins. For a moment, the moss seems golden, the fields alive again. You breathe deeply. The air smells of rain, of earth, of something that almost feels like forgiveness. Almost. You stand in modern Ireland now, the year long since turned. The famine buried beneath glass museums, marble plaques, and the language of remembrance. Yet as you walk through the fields of Mayo, the silence feels unchanged. The land holds its breath. Beneath every blade of grass lies a story, and beneath every story, a grave. They call this era commemoration. But the earth does not commemorate. It remembers. You pass the memorial at Dulau, a stone cross standing in wind and rain. Beneath it, an inscription reads, "How many walked? How many died?" You already know the answer is uncountable. The Dulau Walk was one of hundreds of such pilgrimages, starving people ordered to march miles through freezing weather just to prove they were deserving of relief. Many collapsed along the road. The survivors were turned away. Their bodies were found days later, faces in the mud, hands clutching rosaries. Today, tourists trace that same route as a walk of reflection. Few realize their footsteps fall on unmarked graves. The famine, now distant in time, has become both myth and mirror. The British archives record it as tragedy, as mismanagement, as unfortunate circumstance. The Irish remember it as deliberate, not murder by sword, but by silence. You sit in a library in Dublin, the hum of computers replacing the crackle of candlelight. Before you lies a ledger dated 1847. The ink is brown, the handwriting elegant, the words careful. Population decline due to emigration and natural causes. You run your finger along the page. No mention of hunger, of children, of fever. Only natural causes. You close the book gently, as though it might still breathe. In the century that followed, Britain never truly spoke of the famine again. It became an absence in history, a void too large to explain, too shameful to claim. Generations grew up with it as a whisper, a shadow, a topic too heavy for conversation. But silence, like hunger, spreads. It seeps into the bones of nations. The guilt that was never confessed became inherited. When the 20th century brought new wars, new colonies, new hungers, the old ghost of Ireland stood quietly in the background, watching. Every empire forgets what it feeds upon. In Ireland, memory became rebellion. The survivors' children carried it in their hearts, through songs, through stories, through quiet defiance. The famine shaped the soul of the nation that would one day rise against its rulers. The hunger for freedom, like the hunger for bread, could not be extinguished. It burned quietly for decades, until it erupted, in speech, in poetry, in blood. And yet, the famine's true legacy is not found in politics. It lives in the ordinary, in the way the Irish treat a meal as sacred, in the reverence for the land, in the instinct to share even when little remains. It lives in diaspora families who still light candles for ancestors whose names they do not know. You travel to Boston now, to a small waterfront park where a bronze sculpture stands, a family frozen in farewell. Eyes turned west, the plaque reads, "They left because they had to." The sculptor has captured something wordless, the moment between life and loss. The boy's hand still reaching for a homeland that has already begun to vanish behind him. Across the ocean, in Liverpool, another statue, a mother, hollow-eyed, clutching a baby. The child's face is peaceful. The mother's is not. Beneath them, a simple line, "Remember the Irish." But remembrance is not enough. You walk through the Famine Museum in Strokestown, where exhibits display rusted tools, letters, and a single wooden spoon, all that remained of one family. You stand before a replica of a coffin ship's deck, its boards warped and blackened. The recorded voice of an actor plays softly in the background, reading from an emigrant's letter. "We buried 3 children at sea. We have seen worse." The words linger like breath on glass. Outside, the sky begins to rain, a fine, steady drizzle that darkens the soil. Somewhere nearby, a farmer works the field, his tractor carving neat lines into ground once soaked with sorrow. The smell of earth rises, familiar and eternal. Life continues, indifferent but constant. You realize that the famine's echo is not meant to fade. It is meant to be felt, not as guilt alone, but as a warning. Hunger, after all, is never only about food. It is about power. Who holds it? Who withholds it? And who is allowed to starve? The same patterns repeat through time, in Bengal, in Ethiopia, in Yemen. History's cruel refrain: abundance beside emptiness, silence beside suffering. The lesson of Ireland is not that famine kills. It is that indifference does. You return to the west one last time. To a small hill overlooking the Atlantic. The wind carries the salt of centuries. The fields below shimmer in late light, golden now, not gray. On the horizon, the sea glows the color of rust and honey. Somewhere below, beneath the grass, lie bones so thin the earth barely feels them anymore. You kneel. There is no prayer to say that has not already been spoken. You simply whisper, "We remember." The wind answers with a sound like breathing. You imagine the voices of those who once walked these hills, men and women whose laughter the world forgot. You see them standing in the distance, translucent against the setting sun, not ghosts, but witnesses, the ones who endured long enough for you to be here. For a moment, you understand that remembrance is not about sorrow. It is about presence. It is about standing where they fell and refusing to look away. As the sky darkens, you begin to walk back down the path. Behind you, the sea continues its endless rhythm. The same tide that once carried the coffin ships now carries nothing but the memory of their passing. The famine is over. The hunger remains, not in the belly, but in the conscience of the world. And you, standing here, in the quiet between waves, are still its witness. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness. The road from Skibbereen to Galway is quiet now. The hedgerows bloom with wildflowers, and the fields shimmer in the light of another Irish spring. To a passerby, it might look like any other countryside, peaceful, fertile, whole, but you know better. The earth remembers what it has consumed. Beneath these blossoms lie a million bones. You walk slowly along the roadside where famine graves once filled the ditches. The grass hides them well, but not completely. Here and there, the land dips, a subtle hollow, a shape too straight to be natural. You pause, listening. There is no sound but the wind. It smells of peat, rain, and something faintly sweet, the breath of the past, still rising. A man once wrote that, "The silence of the dead is the loudest testimony of all." He was right. The great famine left behind more than sorrow. It left behind a moral echo. The empire that starved Ireland did not fall because of conscience. It fell because all empires do. But the silence it left, that refusal to face its own cruelty, still trembles beneath the marble of its monuments. You look east. Across the sea, London stands proud as ever, its towers reaching higher, its river untroubled. Few there speak of Ireland's hunger now. It has been filed under history, a chapter closed, a lesson abstracted. But the dead do not belong to history. They belong to the living who remember them. Every famine since has carried their shadow. Every government that weighs mercy against profit. Every nation that looks away from the starving. They repeat the same sin in quieter forms. Hunger is no longer caused by blight. It is caused by policy. And the ghosts of Ireland still whisper, "We have seen this before." You continue walking until the road opens toward the coast. The sun hangs low, gold melting into the Atlantic. The same sea that once devoured the coffin ships now glows like glass. The horizon blurs, sky and water merging into one endless distance. Somewhere out there, beyond the line where the ocean darkens, lie the unmarked graves of those who fled. They have no stones, no names, no hymns, but you imagine them resting, finally free of hunger. Their bones drifting gently with the current. Perhaps they have become the salt in the water, the very breath of the waves that reach this shore. You pick up a small stone from the ground, smooth and cold. You turn it in your hand and whisper the same word that has followed you through every field, every ruin, every silence. Remember. Because remembrance is the only justice time allows. It cannot bring back the children buried in churchyards or the mothers lost to fever. It cannot erase the cruelty of policy or the arrogance of power. But it can keep truth alive, even when the world forgets to listen. The famine was not just a tragedy of the past. It was a revelation of what human beings become when compassion is treated as weakness, when economics outweighs empathy. That lesson, older than empires, still stands. You place the stone on a low wall and step back. The wind rises. The fields sway like an ocean of green. Somewhere behind you, a bell tolls once, deep and resonant, the kind of sound that feels older than memory. And as the light fades, you realize that this is not an ending. The famine never truly ended. It transformed into story, into song, into the quiet persistence of a people who refused to vanish. You breathe in one last time, tasting the salt of the sea and the sorrow of the soil. Then you close your eyes. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness,